Good morning, boys and girls. This is Miss Blos, and I am here because I'm going to do another read aloud with you, another section of Exploring Coral Reefs. And before I start our next section of this read aloud, I had some words that stuck out at me, and I wanted to see if you could figure out how these words connect. So my first word that I have is spectacular. Repeat that with me. Spectacular. Then I have collection. Repeat that. Collection. Oh, this is a big one. Biodiversity. Biodiversity. That's one. Have you ever heard of? Discover. Discover. Battleground. Battleground. And anemone. Anemone. That's a fun one to say. So each of these 6 words connects in some way. And what they connect to is the reef. And today we're going to be reading about the Great Barrier Reef. And what's interesting about the Great Barrier Reef is that it's one of the 7 wonders of the world. And we're going to be reading to discover how this biodiverse ecosystem works together to survive. And the word biodiversity, some things that I know about it, when I see the part bio, that tells me that I'm going to learn something. This word has something to do with life and living things. Bio. Diverse, diverse, that word part tells me that I'm going to, that this word biodiversity has a variety. So knowing the word biodiverse or biodiversity tells me that I'm going to know that the Great Barrier Reef has a variety of life, and knowing those parts tells me what I need to know about this word so that I understand it. So we're going to find out how this variety of life works together to survive and thrive in the Great Barrier Reef.
The Great Barrier Reef by Glenn Phelan. Reef relationships. What do the Grand Canyon and the Great Barrier Reef have in common? They both are listed among the 7 natural wonders of the world. If you have ever been to the Grand Canyon or seen pictures of it, you know why it is on the list. It's spectacular. So is the Great Barrier Reef. What's so special about the Great Barrier Reef? For starters, it's the largest reef system in the world. In fact, it's the largest structure ever built by living organisms. It isn't one continuous reef, but a collection of about 3,000 reefs that stretches over 2,000 kilometers, or 1,250 miles, along the northeastern coast of Australia. Here we see a map of Australia, and the Great Barrier Reef is in the northeastern corner of the continent. The Great Barrier Reef has incredible biodiversity. So far, scientists have identified about 400 types of coral, more than 1,500 types of fish, and thousands of other creatures there. Plus, new kinds of organisms are being discovered all the time. During a recent 4-year survey, scientists discovered hundreds of unknown organisms. You never know what you'll find in the reef. Competitors and partners. The Great Barrier Reef may look like a beautiful garden, but to the organisms that live there, it's more like a battleground. Organisms must compete with one another constantly to survive. Algae compete for sunlight, fish and other animals compete for food, shelter, and mates. Organisms use physical or behavioral adaptations to get a jump on the competition. These adaptations make for some very unusual interactions beneath the waves. Sadly, butterfly fish usually feed on algae, but they also have a taste for sea anemones. Butterfly fish are not affected by the poisonous sting of the anemone's tentacles and will tear them off for a tasty meal. What chance do the anemones have? Clownfish to the rescue. Clownfish also are immune to the anemone's poison and live among its tentacles. That's fine with the anemone because the fierce clownfish drives the butterfly fish away. The bright colors of the clownfish also attract smaller fish to the anemone. The anemone stings and paralyzes the fish, gobbles them up, and the clownfish snacks on the scraps. Clownfish and anemones are partners in a watery world of competition. Speaking of partners, you won't find a better one on the reef than the blue streak cleaner race. The race uses its markings and back and forth movements to advertise a cleaning station. Larger fish stop by so that the race can nibble away parasites that live on and in the larger fish. Races get a meal and the other fish get rid of harmful parasites. This is one of the many perfect partnerships at the Great Barrier Reef. Here in this photograph, we have a clownfish, and it reads, "A clownfish swims without harm among the stinging tentacles of a sea anemone." There is also a beautiful picture of some butterfly fish. This caption reads, "A butterfly fish uses its pointed mouth to poke into small spaces in search of food. It also might snag a tentacle from a sea anemone." This next photograph is a photograph of a blue streak cleaner race. And the caption here reads, "A blue streak cleaner race eats parasites from the mouth of a giant grouper." So there's actually, if you look closely, two fish there. The race is inside the grouper's mouth. That's amazing. Eat or be eaten. Hold the palms of your hands very close to, but not quite touching the sides of your face. Do you feel the heat coming from your hands and face? Believe it or not, you are feeling energy from the sun. Plants use energy from sunlight to make their own food. We get some of this energy from the sun when we eat plants or when we eat animals that have eaten plants. Your body uses that energy to keep your cells working, to move, and to keep warm. Organisms in the Great Barrier Reef also depend on the sun for energy. Once the energy enters the ecosystem through tiny floating plant-like plankton, algae, or plants, it passes from one organism to another. The result is a complex food web that shows what eats what. The diagram here shows just a handful of these feeding relationships. We're going to take a closer look at the food web now. And the directions say, Place your finger on the drawing of plant-like plankton. Then follow the arrow to the animal-like plankton, then to the coral polyps, to the humphead parrotfish, and finally to the black-tip reef shark. You have just traced the path of energy in a single food chain within the food web. There are many food chains in a food web. What are some other food chains you see in this food web? When I look at this complex food web, I'm noticing several things. I notice each of the items on the web are labeled from 1 to 19, I believe. And I also notice the arrows that transfer energy from one organism to another. This complex food web helps me to be able to describe how energy from sunlight is transferred through this food web in the Great Barrier Reef. Some of the organisms that are included in this food web include plant-like plankton, animal-like plankton, blue sprat, reef squid, moon jelly, hawksbill sea turtle, blacktip reef shark, and the list continues.
Hi there. I hope that everybody enjoyed reading about the Great Barrier Reef as much as I did. It's one of my favorite things to learn about because it's one of my favorite places in the world. And I also hope that we were able to see how energy from the sun, how it is transferred in so many different ways throughout just a few of the complex food webs that are illustrated on this page of our book. Check it out. There is so much to learn about how the energy is transferred from the sun to each of these organisms that live in the biodiverse environment of the ecosystem with the Great Barrier Reef.